the pi conjugation, conjugations of the stacked graphene shifts into nanoscale graphite sp2 domains, surrounded by highly disordered oxidized domains, as well as the defects of carbon vacancy. So you have some defect, whether you have these functional groups, okay? It can form a stable light brown color single layer suspension in water. And because the presence of those functional group will make this graphene oxide very, very hydrophilic, means that it likes the water. So when you put it in the water, it will disperse very, it will be suspended in the water. It won't settle down, okay? Because it is very stable in the water. So the oxygen-containing functional groups render it a good candidate for application in diverse fields, including water purification. Okay, the functional groups provide reactive sites for a variety of surface modification reaction to develop functionalized graphene oxide and graphene-based materials for a wider range of application. So because you have this functional group, means that it is more reactive. Okay, it is more reactive, and you can easily manipulate or decorate it or react it with other materials to obtain a composite materials, compared to the graphene, okay, where you don't have any reactive functional groups here. So it will be very difficult for you to modify it or even to reduce graphene oxide. Okay, so reduction of graphene oxide will partially restore the sp2 bonding network to reduce graphene oxide. It is less conductive than the pristine graphene, but more hydrophobic with a larger pi conjugated area, leading to a higher affinity towards hydrophobic molecules and aromatic compounds. So this refers to the reduced graphene oxide. Okay, here graphene, when you oxidize it, you get graphene oxide, and then when you reduce it back, you get reduced graphene oxide, which is quite similar to graphene, but we still have some functional group, and you still have some defects here, the broken structures here. Okay, so that's why I said it is less conductive. Okay, because if you have an electron movement here, you'll be interrupted by the defects here. Okay, and then because it lacks of functional group, so it means that it is more hydrophobic. Okay, compared to graphene oxide. Graphene oxide, you have a lot of hydrophilic functional groups here. So it is very hydrophilic, and this is very hydrophobic. This is hydrophobic. Okay. And okay, so if you go through in the research articles, then you'll notice that a lot of people are using graphene oxide for their work in environmental remediations of water and wastewater treatment and pollution removers. Okay, that's the reason why graphene oxide is being the attentions of the research work. So one is that its aromaticity in the graphene oxide can interact with aromatic organic pollutants through pi-pi interaction. So the aromatic structures with the localized, delocalized electrons here is actually can form interaction with pollutants with the similar structures, as in this case. Okay, and then the oxygen functionalities impart a negative charge to the graphene oxide surface. So those oxygen functional groups, when it dissociates in the water at a certain pH, it will form a negative charge. Okay, so this negative charge functional group will be able to capture the positive charge of pollutants. Okay, and then the carboxylic acid, epoxy group, and hydroxyl group are available for functionalization. So those functional groups are very reactive. So you can, if you want to attach it with other nanoparticles, you can react it through these functional groups. Okay, can also be functionalized with inorganic particles like metal, non-metal, and their oxide nanoparticles. So because of this, graphene oxide has been used to be functionalized, means combined with other types of particles. Okay. So the three main applications of graphene-based nanocomposite in this sharing will be based on these three categories. Okay, but of course there are other field of applications of graphene Graphene-based nanocomposite in the environmental pollution. But the three mains or the three big areas are first is absorption, and photocatalysis and membrane. Okay, so for absorption, graphene-based materials will be used in the form of nanomaterials itself or in the three-dimensional structures. Photocatalysts, the graphene-based materials can be used as a support or as a substrate or core catalyst for the photocatalysis itself. And for membrane, normally it is used as a nanofillers. So you include the graphene materials in the synthesis of the membrane. It could be used to modify the membrane properties and structures to enhance the performance and to functionalize the membrane. Okay, so these are the photos of the graphene oxide that we synthesized in the lab from different precursors. Okay, and some of the pictures were taken. This is the applications of graphene in three-dimensional structures. Okay, and this is more to photocatalysis, and this is on the membrane filtration. Okay, being illustrated in the form of chemical structures like this. So the first main topics of this sharing is on the graphene and derivative as adsorbent. Okay, I started it with adsorbent because I think this is the one of the most heavily studied area for graphene and its derivative. Okay, as adsorbent for pollutants removal. So before I introduce you to the different applications of graphene as adsorbent, I think it's good for you to understand some of the absorption mechanism so that you can illustrate yourself on the interaction between the graphene adsorbent with the pollutants. Okay, so the dominant absorption mechanism could be in the form of electrostatic interaction. So it means that this is purely based on the opposite charge. So, you know, when you have a positive charge and you have a negative charge, so they will tend to attract with each other and combine. For instance, you have a positive charge pollutants and then you have a negative charge adsorbent. So these pollutants will be attracted and captured by the adsorption. Or it could be a physical adsorption such as the hydrogen bonding with van der Waals forces and hydrophobic interaction. Or it could be in the form of ion exchange. Okay, ion exchange, you replace the similar charge of pollutants will replace some of the charge on the adsorbent. Or surface complexation, so you're forming complex structures with the pollutants. Precipitations will form, the pollutants will form precipitation on the surface of the adsorbent, or pi-pi interaction. So meaning that this is the pi, the structures of one unit of graphene unit, and then because of the pi-pi structure, this is the pollutant. So they will tend to combine, not to say combine, but interact with each other, and the pollutants will be captured by the adsorbent. So those are the few main dominant absorption mechanisms that would play a big role in the removal of pollutants by the graphene-based materials. Okay. Now I'm going to take a few examples of 2D. 2D means that the adsorbent is in the two-dimensional structure, so it's actually a layer. Okay, or in a nanomaterial form. So 2D pristine graphene based, so this is purely graphene based nanomaterials. Okay, so for instance, this is graphene oxide, then the uptake of pollutants is improved with the increase of oxidation degrees. So of course, when you have a more oxidation degree on the graphene, you're getting more oxygen functional group. So those functional groups will be the active site, okay, for the capture of pollutants. In this case, adsorption of this 17 beta estradiol. This is a estrogen hormone, okay, by graphene oxide through hydrogen bonding and pi-pi interaction. So you look at this. This is actually the pollutant structures, okay, and this is your graphene oxide. So the interactions could be through hydrogen bonding between the oxygen functional group or pi-pi interaction. So the pi structures here will interact with the pi structures of the graphene oxide. So meaning that the presence of those plentiful functional group will provide more active site for the adsorption of pollutants. And then we have apart from pi-pi interactions between the benzene ring, this bisphenol A is another pollutant with these structures. You notice that you have the benzene ring structures. Hydrogen bonding also could be formed through the oxygen functional group here. Okay, so for charged pollutants such as the dyes and heavy metals, so the absorption highly depends on the aqueous pH. Okay. Typically, cationic pollutants can be removed easily, while functionalization of graphene is required to remove anionic pollutants. So I would say, because of the graphene or the graphene-based materials, chemicals, when it dissolves in water, normally it will form a negative charge adsorbent. Okay, at pH maybe above pH 4 or 5. Okay. So we will form a negative charge adsorbent. So it will be capable to remove most of the positively charged pollutants. But if we want to remove the negative charge pollutants, then we have to functionalize it. We have to combine the graphene with other materials such that it can remove this negative charge of pollutants under the same conditions. Okay. So if you look at this, the pH, so from acidic to alkali conditions, okay, let's look at the oxygen functional group. So under acidic conditions, the oxygen functional group will obtain the H plus from the acid in the solution. So they will become positively charged. So meaning that at acidic condition, your graphene-based materials will be having a positive charge. So it will attract the negative charged pollutants while repel the positive charged pollutants. But in most of the cases of wastewater, which is more to neutral or slightly alkali, the functional groups of the graphene oxide or the graphene will be in the form of, this is graphene oxide in negative charge. Okay. So negative charge means that it will attract the positive charge pollutants and repel the similar charge pollutants. Okay. So similarly, if you functionalize the graphene with nitrogen-containing functional groups, it looks like this. Okay. So we either get the positive charge or negative charge depending on the pH. Okay. So it's very important if you want to modify your graphene-based materials. Okay, you have to identify what would be the pH of applications, and then what would be the property of the pollutants that you want to remove. Okay, if it is positively charged, then maybe you should operate or functionalize your graphene with this type of functional groups. But if you want to remove negative charge pollutants, then either you shift the operating pH to acidic conditions, or you functionalize it with a functional group that will form positive charge under the similar pH condition. Okay. So now I'm going to the graphene-based. Just now is on pristine. Pristine means purely graphene. Okay. Now I'm moving on to the nanocomposite. So the reason that we make it into graphene-based nanocomposite means that we combine it with other materials is that we want to enhance the adsorption capacity towards a wide range of pollutants. So we are not only targeting just cationic or anionic, we want it to be able to remove both charge of pollutants. So normally we functionalize it with other compounds to form composite. For instance, there are a lot of strategy that can be used to functionalize the graphene-based materials. We can introduce the oxygen functional group, carboxyl methyl, cellulose. I think I'm not going to read through all. You have a lot of chemicals that can be used to functionalize it. Or you can introduce it with the N-nitrogen-containing groups such as polydopamine, dendrimer, and so on. Or we can incorporate multiple functional groups. Okay, see the figure. So here, later on in the examples, I'm going to show you the functional group being attached to the graphene materials. And then we can incorporate it with other materials to obtain synergistic benefits such as photocatalyst and membrane. Okay, so those are the many strategies that could be used to produce the nanocomposite. Okay, so graphene oxide modified with multiple functional groups and magnetic nanoparticles. So here you can see that graphene oxide, because of the functional group, so you can do a lot of modification work of it. Okay, I think okay, just ignore on the reaction conditions and so on. I'm just going to show that. So in this case, you see that the green color is actually the iron oxide. This is a magnetic iron oxide. Okay, so it's being attached to the graphene oxide, and then you can introduce the nitrogen functional group. So you see you have a nitrogen functional group attached to the graphene oxide. And here we have other cases where the graphene oxide is being combined with the silica because of the reactive functional groups. And then you have some other functional groups here, okay, sulfate and so on. Okay, so meaning that this graphene oxide is a very versatile material. You can do a lot of functionalization. You can introduce different types of functional group of it. Okay. So this is another interaction mechanisms involved in the removal of heavy metals ions. So as I said, those important adsorption mechanisms such as electrostatic interaction, okay, complexation, pipe interactions, and then the van der Waals. So if you notice that if your graphene materials is with different types of functional groups, you notice that you have a sulfate and then you have a nitrogen functional group. So under different conditions, okay, they'll be present in a different charge. So by manipulating the different functional groups, you'll be able to produce graphene-based adsorbents for the removal of different types of pollutants. Okay. So another diagram showing the interaction between the graphene, the modified functionalized graphene oxide with nitrogen functional group, and then with a benzene ring. So you see, they can interact with the outer ring here is actually the dyes, okay, dyes pollutants. So the graphene oxide composite can interact through pi-pi stacking, electrostatic interaction of the different charge, hydrogen bonding, and then you have other hydrogen bonding as well, and then you have the electrostatic interaction. Okay, so it means that if you functionalize it, you're getting more possible interaction between the graphene materials and the pollutants itself. Okay, so the benefit would be you produce an adsorbent which would remove the pollutants at a better efficiency. Okay, because you have many functional groups and many interactive sites, so you can remove, you can capture the pollutants through many strategies. Okay, so that's why you can remove it better. And this is another example. You have a graphene oxide modified or functionalized with the PAMAM, which is a dendrimer with a nitrogen functional group. Okay, so to enhance the removal of heavy metals. And then, yeah, a few more examples is you can decorate it with other nanoparticles. For instance, in this example, they are decorating the surface with magnesium aluminum layer double hydroxide. So they're decorated on the partially reduced graphene oxide. Okay, so they form a composite. And then when they check on the zeta potential is the charge of the adsorbent. Okay, so you notice that originally your graphene oxide is negatively charged. Okay, and then when they modified it with this magnesium aluminum layer double hydroxide, the original MgAl LDH is positive charge. So when you combine them with the graphene oxide, somehow you still get a negative charge for the composite adsorbent. So when you compare the removal performance, so this is the black color represents the original graphene oxide. Okay, the highest performance is actually the combinations of this composite. So you notice that the improvement is very drastic, okay, from around 20% at estimation to around 60%. Okay, even for other conditions also, you saw about a 40% extra of removal efficiency. So this is due to the presence of a more functional group or the more active site for the capturing of the lab pollutants, heavy metal pollutants, okay? Enhanced absorption capacity due to increase in the surface area and number of active site and also charge, okay? So imagine this is a graphene oxide, have a layer, and then if you introduce the spherical nanoparticles of it, so basically you are enhancing the surface area also. So if you have more surface area as opposed to the interaction with the pollutants, so you will be able to remove more pollutants. Another interesting study is that they are producing the graphene nanocomposite with iron oxide nanoparticles. So this is for the magnetic property, okay? And of course, there are other functionalized materials here. So the prepared by layer assembly for dye removal, okay? So such strategy was adopted to prevent agglomeration of graphene oxide. So when graphene oxide is in the solution, because it is moving in the solution, so it tends to come together and then stick together. So when you have those nanoparticles, other nanoparticles in between, so you'll be able to prevent the stacking. So it means that because when the graphene oxide stack together, so two layers when combined, it becomes just one layer. So the surface area will be reduced. But if you have the nanoparticles in between, so you are creating the spaces between the layers, okay? So it means more surface area as opposed to the pollutants. So one thing that I like is that you notice that the black color here should be the adsorbent, the graphene composite adsorbent. So when it is being put into the dye solution, and after a certain time, you notice that the pollutants is actually being absorbed by the adsorbent, okay? And because you incorporate the iron oxide nanoparticles, so you can use a magnet to somehow remove or control the adsorbent particles here, okay? And a few more examples on the 2D graphene-based nanocomposite, okay? So in this case, they are using the ascorbic acid to reduce it, and then this is for dyes adsorption, okay? Graphene oxide, and then you combine it or functionalize with other materials. So you'll be able to remove the dyes through pi interaction and also electrostatic interaction, okay? So, and then if you compare the performance, you'll notice that the adsorption is actually improved because you have more functional groups and more surface area. So this is another example, okay, on the modifications of the graphene oxide. So they started it with graphite, and then you use the Hammer's method to oxidize it into graphene oxide, and then you're going to put on, in this case, it's another iron oxide magnetic nanoparticles, and then you introduce other polymers. So this is actually to enhance the adsorption capacity because you have so many functional groups, and then you have more surface area. The adsorption capacity of the methylene blue was improved from 70 milligram per gram to almost 300 milligram per gram. Okay, you notice that the sharp improvement, okay, for the pollutants removal. So that's why a lot of people, they are trying to functionalize the graphene oxide or the graphene with other materials. Okay, and here is another case showing that the graphene oxide is being decorated with the zinc oxide nanorod. So the 3D image showing this is actually the zinc oxide nanorod, and the background gray area here is actually the reduced graphene oxide layer. Okay, so it's for the sunlight-driven degradation. So this is more on the photocatalyst because zinc oxide is actually a photocatalyst. Okay, when you shine it with UV light, it actually can trigger the photocatalysis reaction to degrade the organic pollutants. Okay, So zinc oxide immobilized or reduced graphene oxide to prevent the agglomeration issue. And reduced graphene oxide is actually to enhance the catalytic activity. Okay, so if you look at the absorption efficiency, probably this case, okay? So if you are using pure zinc oxide, the degradations of the pollutants is very low. But if you combine it with the graphene oxide, okay, you notice that the degradation is actually being improved. Okay, so details on the photocatalysis I will explain more in the before the end of the slide on the topics of the photocatalysis with graphene. Okay, so we have seen so many examples of 2D graphene-based nanomaterials and nanocomposite, and apparently they show a very good removal performance. But still, the applications or the practicality or feasibility of the applications of these 2D graphene materials in the wastewater and water pollution treatment is actually very limited. There are a few challenges in these 2D graphene-based adsorbents. Okay, so one of it is relatively difficult to separate and recover the graphene-based adsorbents from the water or effluents, because imagine that the nanomaterials is very small, and then you put it into the water, and after the removal performance, so how are you going to separate it and recover it to be reused in the subsequent treatment process? So it's very difficult because those materials is in the form of nano materials. Okay, so it's very difficult to separate it. And then we have the irreversible aggregation restacking of graphene sheet. So because those nanomaterials is in the two-dimensional form, means that it's a layer of graphene materials. So they'll tend to, when they move around in the solution, they'll tend to stick together. So they form agglomerations. Okay, so meaning that when more layers are stacking together, we're actually reducing the surface area, and it is not good for our performance, because you have less surface area, means that less active site for the removal of pollutants. Okay, and the last one is environmental risk due to the leaching and release of graphene nanomaterials. So this is linked to the first one, because it's very difficult to separate it. Means that some of the graphene nanomaterials will be present in the treated water. And so far, the risk of these nanomaterials to the environment is still remains in unknown. Okay, some studies show that this nanomaterials is actually harmful for the microbes in the water. Okay, but it's still inconclusive. So that's why we don't want to create another environmental issue while we are trying to address the pollution issue. Okay, so that's why these are the challenges of the two-dimensional graphene-based adsorbents, and we think that if we can convert these two-dimensional graphene-based adsorbents to a 3D macrostructural adsorbent, then we could resolve some of the challenges above. Okay, because if it is present in 3D, means that it's in a three-dimensional form, so it's easier for us to handle it. You can take it using your hand, you can remove it, you can handle it easily, you can separate it from the water, and then you can reuse it. And then we minimize the aggregation form, because in 3D structures, the structures of the graphene has been solidified. Okay, so it won't move around like in the solution. Okay, so we prevent the aggregation issue, and then we lower the environmental risk, because the leaching issue will be minimal. And then we can form a scaffold for functionalization with other materials for multi-functionalities. So it means that these 3D structures can be further functionalized. Okay, so they can introduce other functions apart from adsorption, such as antimicrobial property and photocatalysis. Okay, and this 3D graphene-based composite is actually present in the form of aerogel, hydrogels, or sponge, or microbeads. So I'm going to show you some figures on this 3D form. Okay, and for these 3D macrostructures adsorbents, Okay, the consensus is on the porosity, density, specific surface area, and mechanical strength are the new properties of concern. Because if we want to make sure that these 3D adsorbents can be used, we have to make sure that it is highly porous. Okay, because if the porosity of the structures is not that much, then the removal efficiency actually will be much lower compared to the 2D materials. Okay, and it must be light. Okay, the density must be very light so that it won't be a problem for us to handle it. Must have a high surface area and then mechanical strength. Because if you want to apply it in the real field, if this 3D structure is very fragile, so once you use it and then it breaks down, and that's not good. Okay. So I'm going to bring you to look at the 3D graphene synthesis and fabrication, but this is just a brief introduction to Geo. Okay, I'm not covering the synthesis conditions. Okay, the first one is on hydrothermal reduction. So meaning that we have a graphene oxide, and then we are going to use the hydrothermal reduction under high temperature and pressure. So we are going to somehow we're going to put it into a reactor vessel, a steel vessel under a high temperature and pressure. So we want to enhance the hydrophobicity and minimize electrostatic repulsion effect due to the reduced oxidant functionalities. Okay, so from graphene oxide, we have a functional group, oxidant functional group. Will repel each other. So under these hydrothermal conditions, we're going to reduce it. Okay, we are going to remove the oxidant functional group. So when they have less repulsion between the graphene layer, so they will stick together. Not to say completely stick together, but they will come to closer to each other, where at the later stage, because of this enhanced hydrophobicity and pi-pi interactions, along with the van der Waals interaction and the hydrogen bonding, will cause the 3D random stacking between the flexible 2D graphene nanosheet. Okay, so because we are removing the functional group, okay, the yellow color here are the functional group. So we are removing them, and then they'll be able to come closer to each other, and then they'll be able to bind to each other to form an aerogel in this case. Okay, chemical reduction is another approach where we are using a chemical reducing agent such as sulfonate, borohydrides, and so on to remove the oxidant functionalities on the surface of the graphene oxide, and then so that they can come closer to each other and they can stack together to form in this case is a hydrogel. Okay, so electrochemical method is another approach. Apply voltage drive certain ionic species in an electrolyte. So this is the graphite. So we are using electrochemical concept to somehow we create the gas bubbles in this electrode cell, and then this gas bubble will actually will grow, and when the bubbles grows larger, it will somehow peel off the graphite into a separate layer. Okay, so this stacking, this line is actually the graphene layer. Okay, so when you have a gas bubble in the graphite layer, you're forcing the graphite layer to be separated out into graphene. Okay, so the graphene produced here will be a 3D graphene where you can gather and then you can make it into hydrogel or aerogel that you want. So another method is the cross-linking. I think this is the easiest method. Okay, basically the delicate morphology of the graphene aerogel is normally okay. The three methods here, we are getting the pristine graphene, 3D graphene. Okay, but because the interaction is purely based on the interaction between the graphene itself, it's actually a very weak interaction. Okay, so it's too weak to sustain the conditions of real-time application. Means it's very fragile. Okay, maybe if you press it, you press the 3D aerogel or hydrogel, it will break apart. Okay, so which may result in irreversible collapse of the 3D structures. Okay, so cross-linking is normally used to enhance the binding forces between the graphene oxide sheets. Okay, So you're introducing a cross-linker that will be able to bind the graphene together, the layer together. Okay. So when you bind them together, then this interaction is stronger because this is a covalent interactions between the graphene nanosheets. Okay. Than the non-covalent between the graphene nanosheet itself. Okay, so that's why this cross-linking method is more popularly studied by many researchers because it's easier for us to handle it. And then chemical vapor deposition is another sophisticated. This is a very high-end sophisticated approach used to produce the 3D graphene precursor. Okay, so but because this one requires, you will produce a very good quality of 3D graphene, but because this is like chemical vapor deposition layer by layer, so this will requires a very sophisticated equipment, yeah, and it's very costly. So that's why even though you get a very good quality 3D graphene networks, but then it's not suitable for massive fabrication due to expensive facilities. Okay, and there are two more emerging methods to produce the 3D graphene materials. One is by 3D printing. Another one is using bacteria, okay, as the cross-linker. Okay, so but of course there are challenges for these two approaches. The one is that it's difficult for us to produce the graphene oxide ink to be used in the 3D printing. Okay. So the constraint is from the raw materials for production itself. Okay, and for this is because we're using the bacteria to replace the chemicals as a cross-linker, but the porosity is much lower compared to the chemically produced cross-linking. Okay, so when you have a lower surface area, or porosity means that you have a lower surface area, so it's not good for absorption performance. So it means that this method is still have some potential to be further improved. Okay. So we have cover the pure 3D graphene oxide graphene materials synthesis. Now there are more modification and synthesis works done on the 3D graphene composite. Okay. So just now I cover only the 3D graphene composite, pristine one. Okay, we have hydrothermal method, chemical reductions, and then chemical vapor deposition, 3D printing, and so on. So in actually there are more methods to synthesize this. Okay, so you can combine the graphene with other nanomaterials, with other inorganic nanomaterials such in other nanomaterials, and then we can combine with other carbon nanomaterials such as carbon nanotubes with the 3D graphene. We even can combine it with polymers and hybrid materials. So there are lots. Okay, there are lots, and impossible for me to summarize and show it here. Okay, so now I'm just going to show you some. I'm highlighting a few examples that I think is interesting. Okay, and because you can see the the diagram here. So this is actually a 3D graphene-based composite produced to remove oil from water. Okay, so here you can notice that the graphene nanosheet is being reduced to reduce graphene oxide, and then being combined together into a 3D structures. So the 3D structures here is actually the black color here. Okay, it's actually in a form of hydrogel. Okay, so you see when they pour in the water with toluene and water, which is an organic solution here with water. So you notice that the water is being filtered through, but the toluene is being prevented from moving to the other side. Okay, in another study is the same. Okay, so you have water with a chloroform. Okay, so they manipulate the surface property of the hydrogel. So in this case, it is separating the chloroform from the water. Okay, the chloroform is being allowed to pass through. So you see, this hydrogel can act as a filter for probably for water contaminated with oil or with those organic solvent. Okay. And okay, the interesting part is that you can regenerate this easily. You see, you have a toluene, you have a water, and then they just put the hydrogel on top of the toluene, and the hydrogen adsorbent will absorb and remove the toluene. So you notice that the red color toluene is being removed from the water. It being captured into the 3D graphene composite. So how are we going to regenerate it? Because once the adsorbent is being saturated with the pollutants, it cannot absorb more pollutants. So you need to remove the pollutants from the adsorbent. So in this case, they are showing, and I think you couldn't see it clearly, but actually they are burning the graphene hydrogel here. Okay, the below here is actually a torchlight. No, it's actually a lighter. So they burn the hydrogen here. Okay, so because toluene or those oil remover, they can be burned easily. So they just burned it, and then after they burn it, means that the toluene will be converted to carbon dioxide and water vapor, and means that you regenerate your hydrogel adsorbents. Okay, so you can reuse it to remove the pollutants, and then you can burn it again to remove the pollutants, and then you can reuse it. So this is recyclable, which I think is quite interesting. Okay, but of course, those studies are limited to lab scale study. Okay, in the real application, the case is much more complicated because the toluene might not be present in the form of just a toluene there. Okay, so the toluene might be dissolved and form a mini particle droplets in the water. So the scenario will be slightly different. Okay, and here is to show the composite of graphene that would enhance the removal performance. Okay, so I think we are not going to go through to the details of how I will synthesize it, but just bear in mind that you have a cross-linker here, and then you have KGM. This is conjugate glucomannan hydrogel polymer in this hydrogel. So here on the top is a metal orange dyes, and the bottom is metallic blue. Okay, so if you look at this, if you are using the pure KGM, the conjugate glucomannan hydrogel, it seems like this adsorbent can only remove a certain amount of the dyes pollutants. Okay, so you see the color actually faded a little bit. But if you have adsorbents forming composite with the graphene oxide, so you can clearly see the difference. Okay, basically the pollutants has been removed almost to complete by this composite hydrogel. So it shows the capability of the graphene oxide to enhance the adsorption performance. Okay, as given here. So even the adsorption capacity of the hydrogel is improved. Okay, it can remove more pollutants with the same weight. Okay. So this is in another form in a microbit. Okay, it looks like a delicate jelly. Okay, the cornstarch jelly. So, but in this case, we're producing it using the cross-linking method to get the microbit. Okay, so basically, you are using the I think they're using the polyethylene imine as a cross-linker. Okay, and functionalizer. Okay, to remove the heavy metal ions. So this is the pure alginate microbits, and this is the alginate with polyethylene imine, and this is with polyethylene imine and graphene oxide. Okay, so when they use it for the heavy metal adsorption, you notice that that you have a very obvious improvement in the adsorption removal capacity. Okay, so the modified microbits have a better removal rate due to the copious availability of functionalities in the graphene oxide. and polyethylene for the complexation in combinations with the carboxylate group. So basically, it means that because of the functional groups available on the graphene oxide, so you can improve the absorption performance. Okay? More active site to capture the pollutants. And then, okay, this is another case about the hydrogel of the graphene oxide, the valent gum or modified graphene oxide hydrogel. So this shows the pH affected the swelling of hydrogel. So under in the alkaline environment, most of the carboxyl group are dissociated and we generate the carboxylate and ion. So you notice that we have the COO minus. So the functional group is in the negative charge. So this results in the increased area of repulsion force in the network. So in between the hydrogel layer, so because of this negative charge, right? So they are repelling each other. Okay. So your hydrogel will swell in the water. So meaning that this will create more area in between the layer, so the water can come in and the pollutants will be removed better. Okay. And in this acidic condition, the functional group is in the form of a COOH, so without charge. So if we without charge means that the hydrogel will remain as in its original form. Okay, so water is very difficult to get into the porous structures of the hydrogel, so the removal will be lower. So this shows that when you functionalize your graphene oxide, okay, so it's very important to notice the presence of the functional group here. Okay. So manipulating the functional group will enable you to create a hydrogel that will swell in certain conditions and will improve the removal rate. And here is another 3D graphene hydrogel functionalized with the iron oxide magnetic nanoparticles. Okay, so this is for the removal and degradations of the ciprofloxacin and the tetracycline pharmaceutical pollutants. Okay, so actually the iron oxide nanoparticles will prevent the aggregation of the graphene sheets. Okay, because in between the layer you have the iron oxide nanoparticles on top of it. So it will prevent the layer from stacking together because there are some nanoparticles in between. And this is actually good because it will provide more surface area and active site for the removal of pollutants. Okay, and then increase hydrophilicity and as a catalyst for phantom-like oxidation in the regeneration process. Okay, so the iron oxide nanoparticles will be on top of the graphene oxide layer, and then the advantage is actually a mutual advantage. The graphene oxide has the functional group that will be able to capture more pollutants. Okay, so the pollutants will be captured on the graphene oxide layer, and because of this, the capturing of the pollutants, so the pollutants will be very, very close to the iron oxide photocatalyst. So they can easily the pollutants can be easily degraded in this case. Okay. And then we have another okay, this is an antimicrobial property. Okay, so that include this quaternary ammonium into the graphene oxide hydrogel. Okay, so we form a composite of graphene oxide hydrogel with the quaternary ammonium. So basically, the quaternary ammonium is a disinfectant agent. Okay, if you check in maybe in your, I'm not sure, maybe in your detergents or the mopping floor detergents, normally they put this quaternary ammonium because it has a disinfectant property. Okay, and because graphene or graphene oxide doesn't have a very good antimicrobial property, so that's why if we functionalize it with this quaternary ammonium, we could produce a composite which has a much better antibacterial property. Okay, so you see in the study conducted by other people, so basically they produced this hydrogel, okay, with the graphene oxide and the quaternary ammonium. So they noticed that 99.5% of the E. coli and the SRS bacteria has been pure. Okay, so the reason being is that the quaternary ammonium causes the bacteria to die off through electrostatic interaction between the positively charged quaternary ammonium and the negatively charged bacterial cells. Okay, so it shows the versatility of this 3D graphene composite. You can functionalize it with an antimicrobial property. So, meaning that when you filter the water, not only you can remove the pollutants, but also you can disinfect the water, okay, which is good because you combine absorption and disinfection together in one step. And we have other functionalization. So I think I'm not going to go through all the details here, but because the concept is the same. Okay, basically we introduce other materials to prevent the stacking of the graphene oxide here, so you have a more exposed active site for absorption. So I think that in this case we have an interesting diagram here. It shows the structures of these aerogels. You will notice that it's a very highly porous structures. Okay, so a lot of pores here means that water can go into the porous structures, and then the pollutants will have more opportunity to be captured by the graphene aerogel. And another diagram here that I want to show you how light is the graphene oxide aerogel. You notice that for these structures is below 0.025 gram. If you put it on top of a flower, it even wouldn't affect the shape of the flower because it's so light. Okay, it's very light. Okay, and because if you look at the PSET image, it's actually a highly porous structures. So inside here is actually a lot of air. Okay, so that's why it's very light and a lot of surface area for the removal of pollutants. Okay. And then we have for this slide is to show the pH sensitive towards the absorption and desorption. So let's say if this is your 3D graphene composite, okay. So under pH 4, because of the difference in the charge, so the pollutants will be captured. But if you shift the pH to alkaline conditions, so the charge will be similar. And that's why you have the desorption, means that the pollutants will be repelled from the absorption itself. So this is actually useful for regeneration of your adsorbent. Okay, once it absorbs the pollutants, and then you're going to remove it from the solution, and then you're going to put it into the alkaline solution, so that the pollutants will be released, and you are getting a new or fresh pollutant adsorbent that you can reuse back in the treatment process. Okay. And this is another case showing the advantage of our graphene 3D graphene materials as compared to the activated carbon. Okay, so if you put it in the tube and then we pump the water through this layer of aerogel or hydrogel, so you notice that this diagram actually shows that the breakthrough curve of the adsorbent. Okay, so in case of activated carbon, after you filter maybe just 50 ml of the solution, it's already saturated. Okay, so means that the removal efficiency decreased a lot because of the activated carbon being saturated with the pollutants. But for this case, if you have the aerogel or the hydrogel of the 3D graphene composite, it shows that it can filter more pollutants. Okay, even until, let's see, if activated carbon after 350 mils is already saturated, means you have to take it out and then you have to regenerate it. But for the case of this graphene-based monolith with chemical reduction, we can filter until 1 liter of solution before it is saturated, and then you need to take it out and regenerate it. Okay, so it means that it has a better filtration performance or adsorption performance. Okay, imagine that if you're using every carbon, you have to regenerate it or replace it every 350 mil. But in this case, if you use this, you can extend the operating time. Okay, after you filter 1 liter, then you just need to replace it or regenerate it. Okay, and this is another example showing the magnesium oxide. Okay, so this magnesium oxide is actually a photocatalyst that can degrade tetracycline. But because this magnesium oxide is in the form of nanoparticles, and as I said, those nanoparticles is very difficult to handle. Okay, you can put it in the water to treat the pollutants, to degrade the pollutants, but afterwards, how are you going to recover it back? Okay, so in this case, the magnesium oxide photocatalyst can be decorated on the graphene oxide sheet and then combined and converted into the 3D graphene form. So meaning that the magnesium oxide is already in the 3D structures. So in this case, you can use it to for tetracycline degradation, okay, without having to worry about how to recover or how to handle this magnesium catalyst. Okay, so you see the advantage of this 3D graphene composite is actually the 3D graphene is actually providing a framework for the functionalization of other nanoparticles to provide a synergistic effect. Okay, so the graphene oxide will actually absorb the tetracycline, and then the magnesium oxide photocatalyst on the surface will actually degrade it. Okay, so it's a synergistic effect. So another interesting application is that the graphene aerogel for oil removal. So you just put it into the oil and then will capture the oil, and you can regenerate it using combustion, solvent, or squeezing. Okay, so here shows the example of squeezing, means that you get this after the adsorption process, you take it out and then you squeeze it. Okay, you squeeze it means that you are pressing the aerogel and then you're forcing the oil, the diesel adsorbed here, to be released out. Okay, so squeezing, the efficiency is not that much. And then you have a combustion. Here you can burn it because oil is a flammable material, so you can burn it. So compared with this method, it seems like the burning is more efficient because you can burn it away, even in the porous layer of the graphene composite. Okay, the oil inside the porous structure will also be burned off. But squeezing, there's a limit that you can squeeze it. Okay, so maybe some of the oil is still remain in the 3D graphene aerogel itself. So that's why the removal efficiency. So that's why the removal efficiency is not as good as the combustion. And here you can use a solvent remover. So basically, you put this into another solvent where the oil or the diesel will have a good solubility in that solvent, and then you can regenerate also. Okay, so this is combustion. You see, after the adsorption process, you can just burn it away. Okay, and then you can reuse it again. Okay, and to show how light is the aerogel, so you put it on the fur, it wouldn't even compress the feather. Okay, and here shows the squeezing of the aerogel. So you squeeze it, and then when you release it, it will return it back to the original shape and size. Okay, so this shows the so that's why a lot of people are interested in aerogel, because you can, I mean, the structures, if you manage to produce a very solid structures, then you can use it for different applications and different regeneration. Okay, and here is another example of a microbeads. Okay, so when you functionalize it with carboxyl methyl, cellulose microbeads, you notice that the charge has been improved a lot. Okay, original one, the cellulose microbeads is having maybe minus 10, 20 negative charge. But if you combine it with graphene oxide, you can increase, make it more negative charge. So when it is more negative charge, means that it will have a better removal towards the anionic, the opposite charge, the cationic, the opposite charge pollutants, okay, as in this case. And here is to show the multiple role of 3D graphene composite. Okay, so this magnetic fusion fluid is good to remove the cesium. It's a radioactive pollutant, but because, as I said, the nanoparticles form of this fusion fluid is very difficult to handle. So that's why we use the 3D graphene oxide composite as the housing structures for us to put the fusion fluid nanoparticles inside to remove the cesium pollutants. Okay, so yeah, the graphene oxide 3D structure is actually providing the anchor site for magnetic fusion fluid to be attached on it, and then you notice that if you use the magnet to capture or attract the hydrogel, so it can be easily attracted to this side because of the presence of fusion fluid, which is magnetically nanoparticles. Okay, so we have come through all the applications of graphene and its derivative in the form of an adsorption process. Now I'm going to move on to the graphene and derivative in other matrices. So in other matrices, the first one is in membrane. So probably I introduce a little bit about the membrane so that you get the idea of why do we incorporate graphene in our membrane synthesis. Okay, so membrane separation process is basically a layer of a filter. I'm not sure if you have installed water purifier in your house. Okay, and if you take it out and you'll notice that there's some filter layer, just like a paper, a sheet of paper, a very thin filter layer. It's actually membrane. Okay, so this membrane has the pores on its surface, and then this pores is very, very tiny, where it will prevent the bacteria or other impurities or pollutants to pass through it. And then the treated water, the clean water will be able to pour through it. Okay. But the main challenge associated with the application of membrane process is actually fouling. So remember this word, fouling. Fouling means that the impurities will deposit and clog the membrane surface area. Okay. For instance, in this case, this is the fresh membrane, white in color. After filtering the water, you see that the color turns to a brown, a dark color. Okay, means that the surface of the membrane is being clogged or deposited with those impurities that it is preventing it from passing through the membrane. So we call this as a fouling process. Okay, so fouling triggered by the undesirable interactions between the feed components and the membrane surface during the filtration process. So it negatively impacts the performance and cost, because when the surface area is being clogged by the foulants, okay, water cannot pass through the surface, the membrane easily. Okay, so it's actually you have to wash it, or you have to replace it, or you have to use a higher pressure to push the water to pass through it. Okay, so the incorporations of graphene materials or composite have shown to improve the membrane characteristics such as pore size, porosity, and so on. So those are the good properties that we want to have in the membrane, so that to prevent the fouling. Okay, so could help to minimize fouling, enhance the flux and rejection. So those are some of the images of the membrane. Okay, you see a lot of dirty impurities on top of the surface of the membrane. Okay, so which is not good. So the role of graphene materials in membrane filtration is that you can use it as a freestanding. So it means that you use a graphene layer as the membrane, which supposedly it should have a very good filtration performance. And then another form is supported membranes. You have a support, you have other membranes, and then on top you have a graphene layer, or it could be incorporated in the membrane synthesis. So of these three forms, a composite membrane is the most common one. The reason being is that this is theoretically is a very good membrane filter, but how are you going to handle one layer thickness of a graphene filtration layer? So it's very difficult to handle it because the layer is just one atomic carbon atomic layer thickness. So it's impossible for us to use this in the real field. Okay, and this supported layer also not that preferable, because when you stack the graphene layer on top of it, it's very difficult to control how much of the stacking that you want. Sometimes maybe it's too much, or sometimes it's too little, which will affect the performance. So that's why we prefer to incorporate it in the membrane synthesis, because it's easier for us to control. Okay, and then the benefits of the graphene in the membrane is that it can be a size exclusion. Okay, because among the layer we have a gap, so this would be preventing the impurities with a smaller size, with a larger size from passing through, or it could be due to electrostatic interaction. Either we repel it or we capture it in the graphene layer. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly go through to show you some examples of the use of the graphene or graphene oxide or composite in the membrane synthesis. Okay, so some they use polyvinyl alcohol graphene oxide sodium alginate nanocomposite blended with the polyethylene sulfone cast as the nanofiltration membrane. So the benefit is that because graphene oxide is highly hydrophilic, okay, so if you turn the membrane into a hydrophilic layer, which is represented by the water contact angle. So it means that the water is dropped on the surface of the membrane, and if the angle of the water droplet is smaller, means that it's more hydrophilic. Okay, so you notice that when the pure membrane is incorporated with graphene oxide, the contact angle actually decreases. And then if we look at the water flux, because of this improved contact angle, more hydrophilic, so the flux is increased a lot. Okay, and then the rejection performance also increased because of the presence of this graphene oxide, which help to repel the pollutants. Okay, so more pollutants will be prevented from passing through the membrane. And here is the case of the fouling. So you see the fouling tendency of the membrane has been reduced. Okay, of course, because the surface is more hydrophilic, so pollutants will be repelled away from the surface. So that's why the fouling, the tendency will be reduced. Okay, and then improve rejection of pollutants and so on. So this is another example of combinations of a graphene oxide in the membrane surface. So they put the graphene oxide in the synthesis of the membrane. So because of the negative charge of the graphene oxide, okay, which will repels the the negative charge pollutants from coming to the membrane surface. And then this one I'm just going to highlight on the structures. Okay, so when they incorporate the graphene oxide in the membrane, so it will enhance the porosity of the membrane. So you see, initially the pure membrane is with a sponge-like structures, but when you increase the graphene oxide, you get very porous structures. Okay, so meaning that it's good for the water to pass through the membrane. Okay, because when the water already passed through the first separation layer, you'll be easily moving in these porous structures to go to the other side. Okay, so that's why the flux has been enhanced. Okay, and then we also can use the graphene oxide as a support material to incorporate other nanoparticles such as silica here. Okay, So silica and graphene oxide mix together and then they form a layer. In this case, they are trying to cross-link and form a layer on top of surface. So you can peel it off. So this is actually a pure layer of graphene oxide silica, and then they use it for water filtration. So for this slide, I'm just going to show you the changes in the structures of the membrane. So this is actually a hollow fiber, is a hollow tube membrane. So when you incorporate the graphene oxide inside the hollow fiber membrane, so you're getting more sponge-like structures. So this is due to the increase in the viscosity and hydrophilic functional groups of the graphene oxide that slow down the non-solvent and solvent exchange. So this is a very technical details. Is involve the membrane synthesis. Okay, but basically, I want to show you that the graphene materials can alter the structures of the membrane, which might be good for the water to flow through and preventing the pollutants to flow through. Okay, and here is showing the antibacterial property of the membrane. So normally membrane does not have the antibacterial property, but in this case we are incorporating the silver nanoparticles. Okay, so silver has disinfectant properties, but because the silver is a nanoparticles, as I say, nanoparticles is very difficult to handle. You put it even in the membrane solution before you synthesize it in the membrane, it will tend to agglomerate. So when it is agglomerating, means that less surface area exposed, and the antimicrobial property will be compromised. And in this case, graphene oxide is actually acting as a dispersant, agent. So graphene oxide binds the silver nanoparticles on top of it, and then so that the nanoparticles will be better dispersed in the membrane synthesis. So you notice that this is the antibacterial testing. This is without the silver, and with a little bit of silver, you get like this. But if you incorporate it with graphene oxide silver, the antibacterial property is more obvious. The reason being is that the silver nanoparticle is actually better dispersed. Okay, so no less agglomeration issue. Okay, so this shows the role of the graphene materials to be used in membrane, not only for filtration but also for killing off the bacteria. Okay, and we have more examples of how the incorporations of the this is a reduced graphene oxide and the titanium oxide. This is actually to enhance the to incorporate photocatalytic performance to the membrane itself. Okay, so previously I told you that membrane is just for filtration, but if you incorporate this titanium oxide, you get an additional functionality. So not only the membrane can reject the pollutants, but at the same time, because of the presence of this titanium oxide, and then if you can shine it with UV light, then you can degrade the pollutants, impurities, presence on the membrane surface. So basically, you are helping to recover the membrane performance, okay? Because the pollutants is already clogging the surface, so you degrade it, so you can clean the membrane surface for filtration performance. And here is another examples of having these porous nanoparticles being incorporated in the membranes, and because of these caging structures, so it will enhance the heavy metal absorption and rejection. And then the similar, this is for desalination process. Okay, the graphene oxide actually enhance the hydrophilicity, so you have a better flux. But somehow the salt rejection is being compromised because the thin film layer of the nanofiltration membrane, it has been compromised. Okay, because it introduced the graphene oxide layer, so it has more spaces or gap between the graphene oxide to allow water to pass through, but at the same time the salt will pass through as well. So it's very important for you to decide okay, and to determine the proper formulation such that when you get the improvement in flux, it won't compromise your reaction performance. And then this is another case of having titanium oxide as a degradation performance. And I'm not to go through this because the same example, this is the coating of the graphene oxide with silver on top of the surface. So this is for degradation of the pollutants. And another photocatalytic membrane performance showing that graphene oxide can be used to disperse the photocatalyst for improved photocatalytic membrane. So we move on to the last section of this talk, which is on the photocatalyst. Okay, so semiconductor materials like titanium oxide, zinc oxide have major challenges such as poor visible light absorption, large band gap energy, and quick recombinations of electron or pair limits their photocatalytic activities. Okay, so we can use the graphene oxide or reduced graphene oxide to facilitate the transport of photo-generated charge carriers, which in turn improves the efficiency of the materials in photon degradation reaction. So I'm just going to use this diagram, just in case if you don't understand what does it mean by photocatalyst, is that a photocatalyst, when you shine it with UV light with a certain wavelength and energy, so the electron in the valence band will be excited and promoted to the conduction band. CB means conduction band and VB is the valence band. So the movement of the electron to the conduction band will produce a positive holes, okay, leaving behind some positive charge holes. So eventually the valence bands will acquire a positive charge and act as an oxidizing center. So it will produce the hydroxyl radical, which will be in charge to degrade the organic dye. Whereas on the other side, the conduction band will also be able to produce the oxygen radical that will act as an oxidizing agent to degrade the organic dye. So this is how the photocatalyst can degrade the organic substance into harmless materials such as carbon dioxide and water. Okay, so how does graphene or graphene materials can play a role in photocatalysis? So basically, the introduction of graphene or reduced graphene lowers the energy gap here. Okay, so imagine that you need a certain power to excite the electron from the valence band to the conduction band. But if you have a graphene or a graphene materials here, so the electron does not have to go from here to here. So even with a little bit of energy, the electron can be excited from here to somehow maybe to the valence band of the the graphene, and then the excitation will be carried out here. So the energy required will be reduced, or the graphene or graphene oxide can act as a platform to prevent the recombinations of the holes. Because if you excite the electron, and then if it doesn't stay here for a long period of time, it will drop back here. So it means that the positive and the negative charge will be nullified, will back to the neutral. But if you have graphene or graphene oxide here, somehow the electron will stay longer. Maybe from here, instead of dropping back to the valence band, it will drop to maybe valence band of the graphene or graphene oxide, maybe other semiconductor nanoparticles. Okay, so it will extend the durations of the photocatalytic reaction. So this facilitates the production of oxygen radicals and hydroxyl radicals. Okay, so here are some of the examples of how this graphene oxide can be incorporated, either as you can directly decorate the photocatalyst on top of the graphene oxide, or you can have doping here. Doping, you have another method, dope to the semiconductor, and then you decorate it on the graphene oxide or materials. Or you can have a two semiconductor. So you see, when you have a two semiconductor, the movement of the electron will be somehow changes, somehow modified. So we'll be able to produce the radicals for degradation of the pollutants. And then you can have a metal docked together with the two semiconductor here, okay? Decorated on the graphene material. So it shows the versatility of decorating the photocatalyst on the graphene layer, okay? So here is an example showing the the graphene-based photocatalyst, okay? Because of the pi conjugated structures of the graphene materials, so sufficient delocalized electron clouds and the large surface area, the graphene can be used as a good supporter, provide extensive deposition space, so means that the pollutants will be able to absorb on the graphene surface, and then because of the enhanced absorption capacity, and then the pollutants will be get closer to the photocatalyst. So when the graphene oxide help to capture the pollutants, and then the pollutants will come closer to the photocatalyst, this will actually ease the photocatalytic degradation of the pollutants. Okay, so yeah, this is the same. Abundant functional groups of graphene provide surface ligands and nucleation site for metal cations decoration. Okay, and here you can see that
your time is like for 5 minutes.
Yeah,
more.
another 5 slides.
Thank you. Sorry
we are
about
closing to the end. So you notice that after we functionalize with the combined with the graphene oxide, the surface area actually increased. Means more surface area for absorption and then the degradations of the pollutants. And this is another example showing how the decorations of the graphene oxide with the semiconductor can help to improve the absorption and the degradation because of the presence of more functional groups. And this is another example showing the this copper indium sulfide is another photocatalytic. So the combinations of this with the graphene layer actually enhance the degradation performance. Okay, originally the degradations is around until 60% after 2 hours, but with the decorations on the graphene oxide, you get to down to almost 20 or 10%. Okay, I mean removal efficiency is around 80%. Since the leftover is around 10 to 20%. Okay. So it could be in the form of the photocatalyst. It's not necessarily in the form of nanoparticles, but it could be in the form of aerogel in 3-dimensional structure as well. Okay, so this will be easier for us to handle. So you can incorporate the photocatalyst in this aerogel, the 3D graphene aerogel, and then you can use it for the degradation of pollutants. So lastly is on the challenges and the future prospect. So these are the challenges that are still waiting for us to resolve it. Means that this will be the future prospect for us to study, to conduct our experimental study. First is on the reducing the cost. The current price for productions of graphene oxide is still very costly. Okay, so we have to find out a way to reproduce it in a cheaper cost, and then using less chemicals, and then maybe using less harsh condition, not at a high temperature and high pressure. Okay, so another one is achieving large scale production is still a challenge now. Okay, most of the study is on the lab scale. Okay, because production at an affordable cost will be required for commercial level. Precise fabricating and quality control. Normally, we use high cost and sophisticated device to produce a very high quality graphene or graphene oxide, but this is too costly, so it's not feasible. So we have to find out how to precisely fabricating the graphene or graphene oxide with the quality that we wanted at a more affordable way. Okay, and then of course, this is further enriching the surface functionalities. We can functionalize it with a lot of materials to have a better performance. And out of the lab is that most of the study conducted in lab conditions, synthetic solution, single pollutants. So we need to conduct a more real-life application, like using the real wastewater or maybe using a mix of pollutants so that we can get a better results that can better reflect the applicability of feasibility of these graphene materials in wastewater treatment and regeneration and reusability. How are you going to regenerate it and reuse it so that it will extend the lifespan and the cost of the materials? And the last is on the environmental risk and disposal. So after we use it, how are we going to dispose it? I think this aspect still not a lot of people are working on it. So maybe this will be a good research topic that you can conduct. How are you going to dispose this graphene aerogel after you use it? So we don't want to create another issue on the waste management after we try to address the environmental pollution issue. So lastly, this is the last slide. And I would like to thank everyone for listening to the sharing, and hopefully you get some benefit or some general knowledge from this sharing. Okay, and I welcome questions from the floor. Hopefully I'll be able to answer you, and if I couldn't answer it right at the spot, I will give you the response through the email to Dr. Yuma. And we welcome connections with all the students and the lecturers and other researchers to have a collaboration with our department and our university. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ang, for the fascinating talk. And we believe that we gain so much knowledge about graphene from this talk. And we have 15 minutes for Q&A. Is there any question from student or a participant for Dr. Ang? And there are some lecture here. There are Mr. Tata.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Hello, Dr. Lun. I want to, yeah. Actually, we also interested to make some, doing some research about the graphene, but we would like, we plan to make it by using green synthesis, something like that. Have you ever know that probably you have some suggestion what kind of substance, biological substance probably we can use to synthesize composite, graphene composite, something like that. Thank you.
So we have a different precursor to synthesize the graphene oxide. I think the most common one is the graphite. And then we use the modified Hamer's method to synthesize the graphene oxide, and then we reduce it to reduce graphene oxide. So that is one approach. And currently in our lab, we also explore other other sustainable or renewable resource. Like we're using the waste cooking oil, and we're using the organic sugar molasses from the industry. So those are high in carbon resource. And apparently, it seems like we managed to convert it into a graphene layer, and then we coat it on a support. So we make it into a graphene sand composite as an adsorbent. So apparently, we managed to convert those waste cooking oil and the sugar molasses into the graphene. And then it does show a good absorption performance. So maybe I think in Indonesia and Malaysia, we have a lot of agricultural waste. So maybe we can explore on this. I believe this would be an interesting scope of study.
It's interesting. So yeah, probably we would like to study more about that. So yeah, I already have
I mean, in the future,
idea.
if you have time, I mean, if you have an opportunity, you can come to our lab, and then we
thank you.
Discuss on that. We will show you, and your student can learn at the lab also.
Thank you so much. Sure. We would like to discuss about this, and then we will inform you if we want to have some visit to Malaysia. Thank you so much for the suggestion.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Tata. Is there any question from student? Okay, Farhan, please.
Okay, thank you for the time. Is my voice clear enough?
Yes, we can hear.
Thank you. I have a few questions. The first question is, I remember this presentation explained that pollutants such as dipollutant can be removed when it interacts with the graphene using ascorbic acid. So what we doing after we separating the pollutant from the graphene, where the pollutant going, and how is the impact in the environmental itself? That's the first question, and the second
Hmm.
question is, mm,
Are you going to
yes, I have
mention the
two
second
questions.
question, or you're waiting for my answer for first question?
Oh yes, I'll be waiting for the first
Oh,
question
okay. So
actually.
let me answer your first question. So your first question is on after we absorb or remove the pollutants. So what are we going to do with the pollutants, right? Okay. There are a few. There are a few strategies, and depends on the type of pollutants. So if let's say the pollutants that you are removing is diesel or oil, where I show you that you can burn it off, right? So probably you can use it as as a alternative power supply. Uh, or if you're using squeezing method, so if you squeeze the oil from the aerogel, so you can recover the oil and then you can use it as a power supply also. So that is for the removal of oil. Another case will be like heavy metals. So in some industry, they are using heavy metals as a catalyst or as I don't know for whatever reason. So those heavy metals are actually a valuable resource where if you absorb it and then you can extract it out, maybe remember if you shift the pH of the solution, the absorbed heavy metals will be released because of the charge repulsion. So once you collect these heavy metals, it can be, after it is being purified, it might be able to be reused in the industry. So it's a resource recovery. So I would suggest that if you, it depends on the type of the pollutants that you remove, then you have to identify which strategy that could be used to recover those pollutants. Okay, we say it as a pollutants because if you discharge it to the environment, it becomes a pollutants. But if you recover it, it becomes another resource. For dyes, even for dyes, if you can absorb it and then you can recover it and then you can reuse it back into the textile industry. So the industry is actually they like this idea a lot, but we still have a gap in between the lab scale study and the real application. So this could be the aspect that if some of you are interested, you can try to look at it. Not only for removal, not only for pollutants removal or treatment, but also you look into the aspect of a resource recovery. So you're using the absorbent to remove those pollutants, and then you recover it, and then it could be reused back in the industry or for other application.
Okay, Farhad.
Yes, thank you for the first question. This is the second question.
Hmm.
So it's about the aerogel shape of graphene. So does the aerogel shape of graphene for remediation tools is hydrophobic for water, and uh, the, does it has the permeability behaviors for the pollutant, so it can filtrate the specific pollutant?
Yeah, I think I show you a few examples where they put it into the what with the column, and then they put the water and then they filter it through. Yes, it is doable. But okay, I have to say that it is doable in the lab, but I'm not sure in real life because in real industry they want it to be done in a faster duration. So maybe this filtration will take a little bit of time. So we still need to fine tune the structures. Maybe if it is in a thin layer or it is in I don't know for what kind of depth should be used, so that the process of a treatment will be feasible for the industry requirements.
I have next question about the aerogel. So uh, we have the example at the lab scale, and
Hmm.
when we use it at the industry scale, so we need to make it bigger, and
Yes.
so how we prevent the negative side, I don't know, maybe the pore is bigger, or maybe the interaction between the material is different, or
Mm.
something else that is negative. So how we can prevent it?
Okay, you raised a very good point. Most of the time, the results that we found in the lab, when we upscale and applied it in a larger size or a larger scale in the industry, probably the performance would not be as good as expected. There will be some other engineering aspect that we might not be able to look in the lab scale, but when you apply it in the real scale, there are some engineering technical issues that we have to solve it. So how are we going to prevent it? I don't have answer for that because I haven't conducted that study. But I would say that the current challenge is that how are we going to synthesize it into a bigger size? Because the current one, if you look at all the studies, all the aerogel is in a very small form because of the limitations of the equipment and the instruments used in the synthesis. So if we can overcome this barrier, and then we need to use some engineering design, okay, to design a equipment that can house this and that can operate the filtration or the treatment process. That would be that has to be combined with the synthesis and production of your aerogel. So basically, to move from the lab scale to the industrial application, it's not only about scientific research for the synthesis of the materials, but we also need to consider about the design. How are you going to design the reactor or the column, and then how are you going to operate it?
Okay, perfect.
Yes, this is my last question about water remediation. Okay. About the water remediation, we know that a lot of remediation tools, such as powder, or maybe it is metal, or it's solid things, and we have aerogel. So, according to your opinion, sir, about this model, which is what kind of model that is effective enough, or it can make the water remediation is uh, optimum? What kind of model? Aerogel, powder, or another model that can use for
Oh,
water remediation?
okay. Preferable to be in a form that we can handle easily. So probably will be in the 3D structures. It could be in the microbits. I think microbits is commonly used in biological wastewater treatment. So maybe the microbit forms would be feasible, but we have to. That's why I say have to design the reactor. How could we utilize this? I think one of the suggestions would be if it's in the microbit form, we can use a fluid dye bed reactor. Because a fluid dye bed reactor has been used for absorption of activated carbon. So if you replace the activated carbon, then probably it can be used there. That could be one aspect that can be studied. And then powder form. Normally, if for this adsorbent, I would not advise to use in a powder. I mean, okay, powder. If it is in the size of a micro range, that would be good. I mean, can be used just like activated carbon. But I think it's very difficult for us to get the graphene materials into the powder form. I mean, if we get it into the powder form, it will be in the nano size. So which is not good for us to handle it. Okay.
Okay.
So
All right.
we have a few questions in the chat box, right?
Yeah, but I'm sorry that the time is almost up.
Okay.
Yeah,
Never mind.
maybe we can email you. Sorry.
I will quickly answer.
All right.
Quickly answer a few of it.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
So
Yeah.
the first one is on the graphene membrane, whether it has been used commercially. I think someone has fabricated it, but to use it commercially, Probably not at the current moment because it's still costly. Okay, is there any specific characteristic for wastewater for this membrane? No, normally it's very difficult to answer. Okay, never mind. I'll just say that normally membrane can handle a wide range of wastewater. So we don't say that okay this membrane is suitable for this characteristic of wastewater. No, it depends on the quality that you want. Okay, the quality of the treated water, the pollutants to be removed. Okay, and then oil content. Okay, so the oil being removed or rejected by the membrane will be, I mean, if you have oil and water, so oil will be on the top. Oil won't pass through the membrane. So you can collect this when it is concentrated, you can collect it and then you can burn it or you can use it for other resource recovery application. How is this efficiency of this membrane? Okay, in other study, if you use it in the actual wastewater, of course, the performance will be below than expected. But it's still better than the pristine membrane without the graphene modification. Okay, because the synthetic we only put in maybe 1 pollutants and 2 pollutants, but in real wastewater we have other components, impurities and so on that will affect the performance. So if you test it in the real wastewater, the performance will be slightly below the expectation. And how much is the capacity to reach the solution? Or this has to be decided in your experimental work. So basically, you have to use a different dosage of graphene or graphene oxide in your membrane synthesis, and you're looking at which membrane will give you the best performance, and that would be the optimal. But normally, it won't be too much, because if it is too much, then you're getting creating another issue of agglomeration. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. L, for your time and your talk.
I actually still have a question, but I will email.
All right.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
No
Thank
issue.
you very much for your time, and we are come to the end of this session, and I will close this session. Thank you very much again.
Are we going to take a photo?
All right. Maybe we can take a photo. Okay, please everyone turn on your camera. Okay. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Hold on. Sorry, one more time. And please one more time. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Ang.
Thank you very much,
We'll
everyone.
keep in touch with you.
Sure. Keep in touch.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you. Okay, student. Now we come to the end, and I will close this session. I hope you can gain knowledge about graphene for many applications, especially in pollutant removal. Thank you. I will close this session. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. See ya.
Terima kasih. Bye.